Okay, mob grazing. Does anybody, he kind of defined it there, but where'd that term come from? Does anybody have a clue? What's that? Australia? But, you may be right. We didn't hear it here in the States until '07. The Extension Service had a tour out at my place that Terry Gompert put in 2007. And right after that, people started talking about mob grazing. And so that was the first time that it was really time. I don't know who came up with it. It wasn't me, but I didn't hear it before that. I didn't know what I was doing was mob grazing. So it's different things to different people. He suggested a couple 100,000 pounds to the acre. For me, myself, that's really not getting it done. Maybe 500,000 to 1 million pounds would be more appropriate. Probably depends a lot on your environment, what your forage base is and those kind of things. Probably another way to define it might be multiple moves per day. Or I should say that's how I would define it. I don't think there is apparently an official definition of what it is. But I like to talk in terms of pounds per acre. I think that's appropriate because it doesn't matter whether it's pairs or yearlings or what. You can kind of estimate how many pounds are out there and then go from there. So,
do you think Terry was the first one to use mob?
I don't know. I'm just
Appeared after that.
Yeah, it popped up after that meeting, and so I'm not sure about that. And as we go along here, feel free to jump in. I'm not a lecturer by trade. I grow grass, so if you have questions, just let me know because I'm sure it will be unclear at times. So anyway, how I got started was just was experimentation. Okay, just trial and error during a drought, and found out by accident, pretty much by accident, some of the things that he had up there that my utilization went way up, and I just ended up having a lot more grass, and I'll get into some pictures here in a little bit too. So right here is about 250,000 pounds to the acre, and there's about 800 head there on 3.5 acres with calves, so quite a few pounds. And you can see even at 250 to maybe 300,000 pounds an acre, there's lots of room there. They could easily take more stock density. I made a decision in '08. I had a chance to buy a lot of these horned cows, and I did. But I learned something from that. They take a lot more personal space than non-horned cattle. And so I'm really not successful getting 500,000 pounds or more with this kind of livestock. So it's just something to think about. I'm not getting the densities that I was, because if I try to put them into that small spot, some just won't go because it's too dangerous in there. So I have to stay at 250 to 350 or so. It works pretty good. If I go over that, some just won't eat, and then they're stressed because they don't have availability of grass because they're too nervous to go in there. But with polled cattle, I've calculated nearly 2 million pounds to the acre before, so it can be done, and there's plenty of room. Any questions so far? Anna? How did I get into it? Yeah, it was an accident. Just trying to survive a drought in '01 and '02, and I just started using temporary fence, and then I developed a water tank, which you'll see in a little bit, to move water with the cattle. And had it not been for that drought and desperate times, I probably would have never figured it out, and continue to figure it out. I mean, I made lots of mistakes then, and still make them. But the amazing thing was, I thought I was going to have to destock pretty substantially, and before that year was over, I actually ended up taking in more cattle because I ended up having a lot of extra grass. And so that's kind of what happens. You get into this, and then you grow a lot more grass because of the recovery time that you end up with. And that's kind of the key, is that extra recovery time. So anyway, I think from here I'm just going to draw like how I make my lanes over here, because that usually ends up coming up and it's kind of confusing. Who is that? You know, this ring was pretty fun until last spring when the ducks started flying over. The whole time I was like, hello? Hello? Darn ducks. So, but anyway, for the most part, I just have lanes like this built. They're usually not nice and straight like this. That'd be nice, but they're not. And these are permanent lanes, and they're approximately 1,320 feet. Or sorry, that's 2 lanes. 660, and then I just take portable twine and go across here about every 100 feet or so. And say the cattle are grazing here, then I just take this one out, and then they move into here, and I'll have a fence behind them, okay, but I might only move it once a day, say in the morning or something. But then I'll probably move them up here 5 times. So as soon as I take this one out, then I just jump up here and I put it back in. And then a couple hours later, I'll take this one out, and they'll move up here, and then I put it in. And meanwhile, I might have a well here, and it'll be running to a hose to a little trough, and I just move it as I go, usually once a day, sometimes twice a day, just depends. And I'll just add hose as needed because they're in pieces. So if I go too far, I just put in another piece of hose. And where I live, the water's only a few feet, so it's real easy to pump it. If you're from the Sandhills, you'd be familiar with that. But anyway, that's kind of how the system works. Usually, it's not quite this simple most places, but that's kind of how it works. Any questions on that? Okay, the capacity of the stock tank, it's just a 20-foot feed bunk, and the flow going into it's probably 30 plus gallon a minute. And one thing that I found is that say you start the day with the stock tank down here, which is fine. If you the more animals you have, the more important it is to keep the tank right up in here. Because you know how cattle are, they sense movement and then they follow movement. If you let it get way back here, then they all go drink at the same time, and then there's a little panic. If you keep it right where the cattle are, or very close, it's never any panic because they never really see movement going, and so they'll just come and go. I call that gymnasium effect. You know, like when I was in high school, you might have 1,000 people come to our basketball games, but there's only 2 little hydrants, you know, fountains for people to drink. Well, if it's not very far, you know, people just see if there's a line, and if there is, they don't go. And it's the same with the cattle. If there's a line, then you wait. If there's no line, then you think about going, and so you drink, and they get used to that very quickly. So the water keeps up really good. In fact, most of the day, the water just runs out, and you know, most of the time there's nobody drinking. So at 30-gallon minutes, way overbuilt. Yeah.
You would recommend against an alleyway for water?
No, I wouldn't say that. I just for me, my environment, alleyways cause some problems because of the wetness sometimes of the year, and you know, the trailing associated with going back and forth to water. I think in some environments it might be appropriate. I'm not going to say this is the only way to do it. I mean, there's tons of creativity out there. There's different water systems, different ways to do it. This is a pretty inexpensive way to do it in my environment because the water's so available. You get somewhere where water's more of a problem, you might have to do something different. Anna? Oh. Okay, I apologize. I was supposed to repeat the question. So Walt wants to know what the problem with lanes going to water, and that's what I just answered. Any questions with that? Okay. All right, I'm gonna apologize first because these pictures are in horrible order, and for whatever reason I can't switch them. I don't know what. I have more trouble with technology stuff. But so anyway, my apologies ahead of time. The order on my slides is atrocious. So anyway, I've got a quote here about severe grazing. Any grazing that removes a high proportion of a plant's leaf area in either the growing or non-growing season during the growing season, this causes temporary growth setback to the plant. In brittle environments, severe grazing is often essential for grass health. Everybody clear on that? Okay.
What's a brittle environment?
Okay, that's a good question. The question is, what is a brittle environment? It's like learning how to play Jeopardy or something. Does anybody want to toss out an idea of what that might mean? Dry. Yeah, okay. And dryness does have a factor in it. That is true for sure. What
Savory considers it an area where the litter does not break down within a season.
Okay. Yep. You can have low rainfall, okay, and still be non-brittle. You can have high rainfall and still be brittle. It has to do with the amount of humidity and the speed at which things break down. For example, the best example I can come up with is I took the kids to the zoo in Omaha here a couple years ago, and on some of the roofs at the Henry Doyley Zoo, you know, they've got these little buildings all over, and they had a few that were wood shingled. Some of these old buildings are wood shingled. And there is moss growing on top of these roofs. It's very humid. That would be classic non-brittle to have moss growing on your roof. Out where I live or further west, you're never going to have stuff growing on your roof. It's just not humid enough of the time that Right. So in a non-brittle environment, things recycle on their own very readily. You know, I consider eastern Nebraska and east fairly non-brittle, and from here west, fairly brittle. You know, you go western Nebraska and leave some grass standing, it might stand for a lot of years. In eastern Nebraska, it'll tend to just break down on its own and recycle without an herbivore. In western Nebraska, you really need an herbivore to either eat it or trample it or get it worked in some way to get it recycling through the soil. So, does that make any sense? Clear? Brittleness? Okay. It's a continuum with no absolutes either, so, you know, and it can change, whatever, but that's a good question. Okay, a little bit about severe grazing. I don't know if your instructors like that word or not. We tend to be taught not to severely graze, you know, to leave so much leaf area or whatever. You guys familiar with that kind of concept? Okay. What I found in the real world, though, was that if a plant was at the right stage, where the entire leaf is delicious, you cannot keep an animal from severely grazing that plant. They'll eat it all. So, in effect, in any kind of diverse pasture, some plants are always grazed severely. Okay? Agree or disagree? Agree. Yeah, they are. It's just you can observe it. Maybe in some monoculture or something, they don't all get grazed severely, but if you have any diversity at all, some are always grazed severely. So, if we know that some are always grazed severely, and when we want appropriate recovery time for that pasture or paddock or whatever, what do we need to plan for? Okay, for which plants? The ones that were grazed severely, right? We have to allow enough time for the plants that were grazed severely to fully recover. And that tends to be longer than we think in most cases. I mean, I'm not saying there's any right or wrong time, but if I see one mistake, it's that we tend not to give enough recovery time most of the time. I don't know which direction I'm going here. Okay, here we go. These are just some pictures. I'm going to go through a progression here of where I've applied some of this. This is on the river near Lexington, Nebraska, right along the Platte River. And as you'll see as we go on here, severe weed infestation and a lot of annuals. And I'm using mob grazing as a tool to try to change the situation here a little bit. Anyway, there's after grazing, right? This is at million-pound type density. You can see there's a lot of severe grazing happen right there. Fairly severe. I like to call it scorched earth. Okay? Yeah?
I've taken a fair number of videos and stills of paddocks that the cattle just left, and the owner has said, this is trampled, this is wonderful. I see grass standing at 3 degrees, nothing's on the ground. That's the first photograph I've seen of what I would consider in the dirt. So is this what we should expect to see?
Don't misunderstand me here. I'm not saying you should do this all the time. I'm not saying.
I'm not talking about the stuff that's standing or not standing. I'm talking about the grasses that are actually in the soil. Microbes can actually eat that.
Yeah, in this case, the utilization is high. The trample ratio is probably what? Fairly low, right, Anna? I mean, yeah, there's very little trampling going on here because they ingested most of it. So So the material that's on the ground is now manure and urine and high utilization. And there's times to do this and there's times to not do this. Okay. The objective here was to change this landscape as rapidly as possible to a different landscape, and so this is what I did. But we'll keep going here. This is before grazing, after, you can see. You can see the heavy musk thistle infestation there.
You have some critique over here.
Oh.
When do you do it and when do you not?
Okay, the question is, when do I do it and when don't I do it? You know, that's probably even more complicated than explaining the brittleness scale. You know, going back to right here, you know, is this the thing to do if you're trying to get your cows bred? Probably not. Is this the thing to do if you're trying to, you know, maximize your gain on your stockers? Probably not. This is an excellent thing to do if you have some dry cows that you can expend some condition on, or if you're getting paid to do it, or you know, or you just really feel like, okay, for a short time here, I've got some acreage I really need to affect, to change. You know, I'll sacrifice a little bit of body condition to do that for 2 weeks or a month or whatever. Because as you'll see here in a minute, it will get better. Here's musk thistle. Another little thing about when you start getting to densities this high, the cattle behavior changes quite a bit. They become far less selective, and their eating behavior changes. They'll eat things you didn't think that they liked. They just eat. They just eat. And if you keep moving them, they just keep eating. And I call it buffet effect. You know, we were at Valentino's earlier, and I didn't notice it so much there today because it wasn't that full. But you know how when you're at the pizza buffet and you might be full and everybody there's full, but they bring out a fresh pizza and 2 or 3 people get up, and then you might not be hungry, but still that creates just a little panic in your mind, like, what are they getting? You know, maybe I should get in on that. Cattle are the same way. They just you can really get them full doing this. And whoops. And they'll eat just about anything to make sure their neighbor doesn't get it. Go ahead.
So have you noticed an increase in the spread of those invasives to other places because they're infested?
You're talking about invasive weeds? No, I have not. Yep. Nope. Sure have not. The button's backwards, okay, I apologize. If I push the left one, I go right. So I'll get onto it here in a minute. Okay, so this is just a progression of the same site. You can see how, you know, we went from thick to not very much. Heavy utilization. Don't you like the pretty flowers? Okay, I don't know if you guys can see it or not. I'm going to keep referring to this structure right here. That is a big power plant, and later I'll point that out. So just for reference. Anna? What plant? Who planted that? Oh. Oh, do you want to open up that? No, that's your tax dollars at work right there. Mm-hmm. We don't have enough time for me to get into the management on this deal. Yep. But anyway, we flattened it. Oh, wrong direction again. Okay, so this is where I'm headed with the cattle. You can see, I hope you can see, here's my fences ahead of time, just like what I drew over there. You can see those hopefully. Okay, I want to go right, so I push left. Okay, you can see the density there. They're getting ready to get moved. Okay, this is looking back from where the cattle just came from. So, purple forward, no purple behind. And you can see, we got a lot of material trampled on the ground, even though our utilization wasn't high. What they would eat, they ate, but what they wouldn't eat, most of it got trampled into the ground and made actually a very nice little mulch. And you can see some grass seedlings starting to germinate in the mulch. This is a progression, right? This is like 2 weeks now. It's a month or whatever. This is like 60 days. That is that, right there is that power plant. Okay, so this is the picture that shows, here's what we started with, and here's what we ended up with. And I'm not sure if these pictures were in any particular order from here on out. Any questions about that?
When you're trying to knock down a thistle patch like that, do you find maybe you have to move that back fence up on them a little bit more often, or do you still kind of give them that 4 allotments and then move it?
We didn't keep up with the back fence any different. No animal likes to feed on its dung and urine, right? So they want continually to go to the fresh. So you give them fresh, and they just cram in on the fresh. They'd prefer, that's used up, and they want the fresh. So there's no problem keeping high stock density with no back fence. Anna? This is same season. This is same season. But I'll show you a year and 2 years down the road in a little bit. Jesse?
Cows like this or grass?
Usually they like grass better, but they'll once they get a taste for thistle, they'll start selecting for it too. Yep. And they'll eat the flowers at different stages. I don't know. I didn't really intend on camping out on musk thistle, but I found out some interesting things. We had goats there too, and they would eat the thistle, but they would only eat they'd always leave 2 or 3 flowers on the same plant. You're like, they ate all the flowers but these 2. What the heck, Yeah, I had that look on, just like Kelly's look on for a long time. And finally, after, thinking about it and probably an accident, we started opening up those flowers. And the flowers that they weren't eating were full of the weevil that eat the seed. So they were selecting for the ones that still had seed. The ones that didn't have seed, they weren't interested in them. There was no seed there. So we were actually getting there'd be 1 with seed in it and 13 without when we started going through just randomly counting the seeds with flowers in it. So extremely effective. That's just an aside. So, okay, I'll keep going here. If you have questions, holler at me. Again, apologize for the pictures. This is in the same area 2 years later. Well, you can't really see it. The power plant is down there, but you can't see it. You can see or hopefully you can see all the litter and material that's there now. Here's just some fence line tests. Here's what we had the cattle on what's your right and no cattle on the left. Same with here. It's looking down at it. I have fun with this one because this is actually over here, this is a herbicide test plot. And over here I just had my cows. So my kids with the water. And of course, as I mentioned before, one of my advantages being where I'm at in the Sandhills is the water was really easy to get and pump. And here's my tank. You can see below, hopefully, there's a inlet hose and it comes up through this pipe and just runs into the tank. And then right there shows the drain, and it just overflows out of that and runs through another pipe and dumps on the ground about 300 feet behind the tank where the cattle can't stomp in it or anything. This is my multi-species water tank. And you see there it's low and the calves can get to it. There's just some fencing stuff that okay, this is kind of a top view of, I just took this fence out. You can see how they've demolished this, and this is where they're headed to. And here's some just different things. You can see all the bugs using those thistles. And so when you're just grazing slowly across the landscape like that, you end up with short grass, medium grass, tall grass, and so you usually have something somewhere that's pretty conducive to different species of birds, wildlife, whatever the case may be. Okay. I'm going to switch to a different file on account of I can't get my pictures to. There's another top view of a fence line. Some of the cattle I have. And this is a new piece of the puzzle, and probably the harder piece, right, is coming up with how to grow more grass. That's pretty easy, but then also finding an animal that does well under that scenario is a little trickier. You need something that can eat a lot and do well in a competitive situation. That's probably the next challenge, and that's going to take some time to get that right. There are animals that will do that, but it's harder to find them that will do it continually the way I showed you some of those pictures. This is at my ranch at Newport. This is I grazed this extremely short in late June, and this is September. You can see how it's come back. Okay, so Anna, down the line then, the pictures I showed you in the first were from 06, and this is from late 07, and see the power plant there. Ooh, that's a bad day. Okay, I was going to talk a little bit about, again, my apologies for my slides not being in order. I don't know why I can't change them, but one thing I've learned is when you change one thing on your ranch, you do not change one thing. Everything else changes. So you tweak your grazing a little bit, everything else resets, right? Does that make sense? Am I losing you? Okay. Well, we were surprised, and I'll show you, but one of the side things that came about from me doing this is, okay, so if you're grazing hard in one area, all of a sudden you have this tremendous amount of recovery time somewhere else. I was having a hard time getting over my ranch in 1 year, and different years depend on rainfall. I didn't get all over it, and oftentimes would have maybe even up to a year surplus ahead. So it actually changed our water, and I'll see if I can explain this with my slides being out of order as bad as they are. We didn't used to have clear water and fish, other than maybe one species being carp, but by leaving taller grass, see all these areas here, that's all really tall. Well, I found out that these northern fry, the eggs, they have to attach to a plant for them to be viable. So if you have no standing plant, your fish population's not going to do very well because they don't have anywhere for the eggs to attach. But with some place to attach, all of a sudden our northern pike population went way up. And that changed some things in the lake. I'll get that hopefully I'll get here in a second. This is how I prefer to catch fish. Just bide with me for a second. This is like the new way to rope, right? All right, I better stop and talk about this one. We'll get back to the lake in a second. So, an area where I was mob grazing several years, I found this piece of metal sticking out of the ground. I was like, what's this? Anyway, I get to dig in, and it's an old corn cribbing that must have blown out in my pasture years ago. And so I had to go get my loader to get it out. And when I did, all this came up with the corn cribbing. So right underneath here, you can't see it, but there's corn cribbing under there. And all this is built up on top of the corn cribbing. And I like this picture because it shows the dense roots. I mean, it's just a mat. I could barely rip it out of there. And, I don't know if the soil just built up on top of the corn cribbing or if the corn cribbing sank or some of both. I really don't know, but, we've got a nice mat of litter here, and you can see how thick it is, and it's going down. And then you can see my soil, which is really not soil, that's just sand. But what's going on top of it is pretty cool. And of course, you're not going to get any erosion on a mat like this. That no water is going to escape that with soil particles. So pretty good stuff there. And there's just a little bit closer picture of it. There's my little helpers that are here. Okay, here's some, sorry about the jumping around, but this is back to where all the musk thistle were, where it was a sea of purple in front. This is that area 2 years later. That's me in it. You can see what's happened there. It turned to a very diverse warm season native grass stand. Okay. Any questions?
I have one on your strategy of operating your field for the season. You have spring cattle cows.
I do.
So do you, is it
Yeah, it can be a concern matching that. That's why I was saying earlier, you know, I don't recommend scorching the earth all the time. And so how I like to explain that is just speed the chain up. You know, if you've got a spot you really want to do a deep massage to change it, you know, that's all right. Do that for a little while. But if your condition's slipping, just move faster. Just move faster. Don't make them. They're still going to severely graze some plants. That always happens. But just allow enough recovery time for those plants too, and just move faster. You know, the animals will kind of tell you, you know, if they're dissatisfied or whatever, or if their manure starts changing. You know, for us, if it's you know, getting way too loose, I need to slow down a little bit. If it's stacking up, I need to speed up. And you can make those changes. You know, you think, oh, geez, how am I going to figure all that out? But you're there every day. You're moving them. You know, you see what's going on the ground, and it's easy to make those adjustments. You know, I moved them 5 times yesterday. Maybe I should try for 6 tomorrow or whatever.
But what I'm kind of talking about the nutritional value of the grass as you go through the season. So in September, say, for example, you have a winter calves. Do you feel that the grass meets the nutritional requirements of your calves at that time, whether they're on the cow side or not?
Well, you know,
That it's beginning to, you know, wane a little bit and change, and then it goes into the winter season.
okay. The question is the quality of the grass late season. Okay, a few things on that. For sure, some species are going down in quality at that time. That's a fact. What I've found though is the more recovery I give, I have late season species that I didn't used to have that are fairly high quality. For example, in August now, in my meadows, I have lots of these Maximilian sunflowers. I don't know, somebody in here probably knows the species of them, I don't know, but that's the first thing they eat now. And you don't see them except for in road ditches where I live. So they're actually out in the pasture. So the more diversity you can get there, usually you have something that's good. But even then, you know, you're going to have to probably let them go more selective as you move, as your quality changes. So, and maybe in some cases, you know, supplementation would be necessary. I don't know.
Chad, have you ever attempted to set your fence height tall enough so that the calves could go ahead and graze in areas where the cows could not get to? Say that time of year to have more opportunity to select where the cows do?
Yeah, I don't worry about calves going ahead. That's fine. It happens all the time. Yep. They'll get to where they find a little higher spot and they get onto that until they get so big that they're always getting zapped. When is my mob grazing season? Okay. You know, I just like to go the growing season, you know, May through October. It wouldn't bother me to start earlier. Usually my place is sub-irrigated. Usually I'm underwater if it's too early, so I'm always waiting for the water to go down. If I didn't have to wait for the water, I'd probably start earlier. But, you know, all season long. It's hard for me to do it in the dormant season because my water lines freeze up, and it's just not practical. I think it could be done though. Yep. Anything else, Kelly?
Don't do any annual temporary forages on your place at all.
Okay, the question is if I do annuals or temporary forages. I do not.
That's what I thought.
Yep. Yep. That'd be work to plant that and
Yeah.
Okay, here's just some grass pictures. I think I have better ones of these at the end. Just a second. Well, maybe we'll talk about this one a little bit. Okay, so here's a little blowout. It's been a blowout for as long as I can remember. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll mob graze this blowout and see what happens. So if I can remember which way to go here. Okay, so I put my tub in there, and I put up some fences, and I'm preparing to do this. So it pretty well leveled it, got some serious high impact there. What do you think? Then, obviously, this is an extremely sandy site. So, any guesses on what the outcome was? Except for my kids that know the answer. What's that? Okay, could have got, yeah. Well, and in fact, you know, this was tricky business, right? Because I'd actually done this 5 years before this in a different site, and like the next day I had grass seedlings, and it fixed it. I mean, it covered it up, and I was good to go. In this case, though, it didn't happen that way. No, I guess I don't have a picture for today. But what ended up happening to me is like the very next day, we got like a hard 2-inch rain, and it just capped that thing, and it was worse. So, you know, you never know. If I'd have known about that, I wouldn't have done it. But, you know, when I did it a few years before, it worked great, but we didn't have a hard driving rain the next day. So, maybe it was the right tool with the wrong timing. Maybe it was the wrong tool. I don't know.
If you had yield, you go out like that.
Yep.
Like,
Yep. One other one in particular, I did it, and it went through a fence line between me and the neighbors. And the next day I had just the annual grasses, but it covered up. And then as the years went on, his side covered up too. And I think what happened was it just affected the water cycle enough in that site that the moisture was staying on both sides, and his side started growing grass too. But I don't have pictures of that one. So, but it can work, and it cannot work. I've seen it happen both ways. So it's not all sunshine and lollipops. Here's just my cows moving along. Okay, I think now I'm ready. Okay, so I'm into mob grazing a couple years at this time, but not very many acres on my ranch. And this is along one of the lake beds. I've got a couple lakes. This one's called Otter Lake. Anyway, I just want to point out this tree back here, because one of the things that ended up happening, you know, how I said, oh man, my utilization went up and my recovery time went up, and even areas that I didn't end up mob grazing, like this lake, which I do not mob graze, changed. Remember the fish, and anyway, by having more recovery time. Okay, I'm still not where I want to be, but get an idea what this lake bed looks like. A whole lot of nothing there. Flood. It's my wife and the grass. Right now I don't even have them. I don't know, buddy. I'm going to change. How do I change the... I apologize for the order of these. So I don't know why. Okay, here we go. Okay, so a couple years later, sorry they're not in order, but okay, that's that tree I pointed out. And as you remember before, it was just sand beach and very little vegetation around that lake bed. Yeah, now other trees have come up, willows, and the water was muddy. Now it's clean and clear, and we used to only have carp in it, and now that the spawning conditions are better for the northern, there's all kinds of fish in there. It changed the whole landscape. There's looking the other direction. Where it was all sand there in those other pictures, it's and there's that tree again.
Chad, did you graze right up to the water's edge?
When I was there, I did, yep, but just a long recovery would do this. You remember the picture with me holding those two fish? That was looking this same direction. This blowout was right behind me. That little blowout you can see there. And so a lot more vegetation.
How many years is this after you've done that?
You know, I think I took the pictures, it was probably 5-6 years after the fact, but I could have taken them the next year and it was shocking. Yeah. I didn't think about it, but
So Chad, will you come back and raise that again then? This,
I use it. The difference is now I get, 100 stock days instead of 25. Yep. But I just give it a break once in a while, and it makes a big difference. Okay, the question is, what percentage of my operations in the mob grazing? About half. Yep. The half I don't do it on is upland sands, and it's just marginal return on your time and labor up there for the amount of actual forage you can harvest that keeps me from doing that. Yeah.
So a half on an annual basis, or pretty much year after?
Okay.
Pretty much year after year, half of it is never mob grazed?
Correct. About every year
Maybe
there's.
every once
Well, what I mean is half of my ranch is set up in lanes where I can easily mob graze it. Half of it's blow sand that I don't go to the trouble. So, and I don't get around the half that's mob grazable every year. Some years I do, but some years I don't. It depends on the growing conditions. So. Anything?
Are there specific vegetation situations where you definitely want to mob graze or would stay away from it?
Okay, are there vegetation conditions where I would?
Basically, you showed us that if it's all muscus, you want to mob.
Yep. Is there?
Grassland that hasn't been overtaken by something undesirable like that?
I might consider my timing in some instances, but if I had the ability to mob graze something in lieu of grazing it another way, I would probably always go mob grazing. Once you've seen the benefits and start putting a pencil to it, it's pretty hard not to do that. And I'm not saying that you always make that decision, but if if other factors weren't a consideration, yeah, I would stick with it.
Well, growth stage of the vegetation.
Oh, growth stage? That all works its way out. You know, if you're worried about growth stage, just wait 10 minutes, it'll be in a different stage. You know, if you left a lot last year and you're growing through this time, no, that doesn't bother me a bit. Yeah. Because, you know, you hit the certain plant the right, quote unquote, right stage. Well, in a few weeks you're not going to. I mean, you can't bother yourself about that.
But you don't think you can start too early?
The question is, do I think you can start too early? With the proper plan and the proper stocking rate, no.
Enough places to move on a daily basis.
Yeah. No, you can't start too early. You know, I have seen where seasonally, you know, we had a late spring and probably didn't plan for enough extra or whatever, and the grass came slow, where we probably started too early, but that was my fault, not the grass's fault, you know. I found that the more, I don't know if I can find a picture here, but the more often and the harder that we mob grazed, I don't know how to bring up that little thing where you can see all. Well, there's that blowout in the back, remember? Okay, just the harder I do it and the more years I do it, the more of this I end up with. This ends up being the result. Is just more native grass and lots of it. Native grass loves this. You know, I talk about it this way. This isn't a perfect analogy, but I know we probably have an athlete or two in the room. I saw a wrestler here. You know, if you're working out, which I know I used to, kind of fell apart, but you know, and you're you know, the idea with lifting weights is you lift hard and then you do what, you athletes? You take some days off, right? I mean, you don't just keep doing it. You take some time off so that it can recover, and when it recovers, you're usually a little bit stronger than you were the first time. So it's kind of like that. And then I use this analogy. You know, some of you young athletes can probably lift again in 2 days. Okay, that's like living in eastern Nebraska where there's a lot of rain. It takes me at least 3 weeks to recover now at my age. That's like living in western Nebraska where you get, you know, 14 inches. So, you know, it's pulsing it and then recovery time. So, yeah. I feel like I see more, but I don't think Anna's data shows that. I mean, I don't know. Can you answer that quick, Anna? You know, historically, I think I do see it anecdotally. You know, the last few years have been kind of strange at home because we went from severe flooding, you know, all that water in front of my house, to then 2012. We had 2 years of severe flooding. Then 2012 we had no rain. And a lot of forbs just plain drowned it out those 2 years. And then the next year, it just went from saturated completely to bone dry, and I don't know if we've got a good test on that. I mean, I know that I see Maximilian sunflowers in my pasture that I don't see in other pastures. I don't know. Things cycle so much with this. You know, you might have a year when, whammo, it's all clover, and then a couple years down the road it's all big blue stem, or the next year the dominant grass is Indian grass, or that's why all those grasses are there, because you can pat yourself on your back sometimes, but a lot of times it's Mother Nature that dictates what's going to happen.
Utilization versus trampling.
Okay.
Do you think there is a management way to use this strategy to either gain one or the other? What would it be if there is?
Okay. The question is trampling versus utilization, and what strategies to get both, and maybe when and why, and how come we would do one or the other. Okay.
Next stop.
I guess big picture wise, I think the animals will tell you how much utilization. There's times of the year when high utilization, you really can't stop it. The animals are, if you're the 10th of June and all the grass is like this and lush and whatever, they're going to eat it all. When you get into, August, September, October, when it's tall like this picture here, to utilize all that, your animals are going to suffer. And so maybe this is when you would try to do a little more trampling and less utilization. But it does not bother me to utilize it all if the case would be that way. So that's maybe the big picture idea there. Some little things. The more square you can make your paddock, the more utilization. The more rectangle the paddock, the more trampling. As a tendency, I wouldn't say that's 100%, but the more they can just go in and they don't have anywhere to move around, the more utilization you'll get. If it's a really wide paddock, and they can go in and work back and forth, you'll tend to get more trampling. You tend to get more utilization at the front fence than at the back fence. So sometimes, and I don't know if you guys understand what I mean there, but our cattle are moving this way, and I take this fence out. How the cattle behave is they all go right here to the front fence, and they realize they can't walk any further, so that's where they start eating. So utilization is actually highest here and goes lower this way, even though you're moving that way. And so there'll be some slight differences even at 500,000 or 1 million pounds on the utilization within a particular paddock. I don't bother about it. If you wait long enough to come back, just about anything fixes a lot of things. Anna? Okay, Anna's asking what is enough rest. Okay. Oh, this is a complicated one because we use the word rest interchangeably with recovery. Are they the same thing? Bruce says no. Anybody else want to chime in? Yeah, they're not the same thing, but they get talked about as if they were the same thing. So I think you're asking about recovery. And I don't think any of us are smart enough to know how long's enough time, actually. In my environment, if my goal is willow trees, I'm going over it too often. It depends on what you're wanting there on that landscape. Every species probably has a little different recovery scenario. I do feel pretty strongly that typically we underestimate the time needed for recovery. I think most of the time it's longer than what we think. That's probably my opinion, but okay, on the meadows, Anna asked what my rest periods are. I mean, I just try to go over them once in the growing season. Is that long enough? Well, in my scenario, if I wait longer than that, I start getting a real buildup of thatch and litter, and if it's wet, I can't get it reincorporated. You know, I ran into that in 2010, 2011. It's so wet, and I grew so much grass, couldn't get ahead of it all. And so when I got there and trampled it, you know, I just have a mat like that thick, and it wouldn't go down because it was just too wet for it to. I suppose the microbes would drown it out. If I go over a season on this kind of production, it'll start taking itself backwards in my environment. In my hills, I don't think it would bother me to go multiple years if I could figure out how to do that. Actually, my hills most of the time do get multiple years because I don't graze them in the summer very much. Is that clear, or did I mess it up even more? Confuse you? I have been, yeah. Yeah. There's several management factors there for me. I don't have anywhere else dry to be in the spring when it's so wet. So that's part of why I do that.
What do you think you'd do different, Chad, if you had a lot of heavier soils like we're located, say, around Lincoln or well-drained sands?
Well, I'm going to find out because I'm moving to a place like that. I'm moving to I bought a ranch in Montana actually, and it's as you say, pretty well drained, better soils, and so out there I plan on a 2-season, season on, season off recovery, and if I lived in eastern Nebraska, I'd probably just go ahead and hit it every year, but I might take some areas and experiment with leaving it longer and see what happened. But I'd probably just keep going, the more often you can move them and the denser you can keep them, the more grass you'll grow. And I guess that's kind of a principle I think is kind of a truism. If you can bunch them as much as possible, move them as much as possible, and not come back, allow adequate recovery, it's pretty hard to screw it up.
Chad, on the question of density, let's take your lane drawing over here. If you moved, if you placed your fences, your cross fences, let's say 66 feet apart, so you had one acre. If the next one, you only moved to 33 feet, so when you took down the fence, they would have less to come back to. Does that double the density?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Chad, each spring or each year, as you get ready to put your plan together, to do your mob grazing, could you tell us the process you go through on that? I mean, do you, for example, like you were grazing this kind of a site in August, is it going to come back that next year to be grazed earlier or later? How do you do that?
The question is, how do I plan where I'm going to graze, when? And the answer to that is I never have any idea. And I don't bother myself about it. The weather, the amount of forage there, all that is so unpredictable that you just you just figure maybe, okay, I'll start over here this year, and then you just start going. I couldn't really get somewhere the same time every year if I tried. I mean, that would be a management headache. Yeah. So if there's I don't know if any of you have studied the holistic management, but they've got a very elaborate grazing planning book. Okay, recovery periods and growth rates, and you figure longest recovery and shortest recovery and worst possible and best possible and blah blah blah, and you can spend 2 days going through this thing. And then if you look in the back, right at almost the last paragraph, it says, however, if you have about 150 paddocks or more, in most cases no planning's needed. And I was like, there we go. Like this summer, I probably moved the cattle probably close to 500 times, 500 paddocks. So very little planning needed. Just go start moving fences, and usually you have more grass than you know what to do with anyway.
Do you have any mud problems?
Mud problems?
Yeah.
Question if I have mud problems.
Obviously you don't, but you have to think about it.
No, not what you're thinking about mud problems, I don't think. I mean, there's times in the spring when it's just so wet I can't get out to do things where I'd like to do them, but it's not like a mud problem. Like our cattle can wade in the water with that sand base. It really doesn't do anything detrimental. So no, I don't really have mud. I have water problems, but I do not have mud problems. Hard to think there's a difference, but there is.
One's got dirt and the other one doesn't.
Right. Go ahead.
What kind of effect did last year, 2012 drought have on your operation and your strategies for grazing?
Okay, it really didn't change things for me one bit. In fact, by the time we got to September, I still had 60% of the ranch I had not had a hoof on. And I had such a stockpile from the year before that it really wasn't too much of an issue. But I did have something happen that was an issue, and that was September 4th we had a severe hailstorm that flattened the 60% I had left. And that was a real game changer. And I don't know, I've thought about that a lot since, and I think the only plan you can have for that is to just have a reserve of money. I mean, sometimes as a rancher, you got inventory of grass, livestock, and money, and you just need to have plenty of money when something like that happens. I don't know what else to say. You either got to sell or find some feed for them or move them. But I mean, our grazing plan went from no problem to get till June 1st next year to cripes. In 30 days, we got to do something. And to happen on a year when it was already record high feed prices, and I don't have an explanation for that one other than save some money. But the
How many animals do you think you need to have the actual mob effect?
Okay, he's asking how many animals do you need to have the actual mob effect? Ooh. I've had pretty good results with a mob as small as 300, but that's probably the smallest mob I've ever monkeyed with, so I don't know how much smaller than that. I know, 900 worked really good for me, but in a different situation, I don't know. And I don't know what the top end would be either. 900 pairs is about the most pounds I've ever done.
What is the mob effect?
What is the mob effect? I think where behavior starts to change, selectivity starts to decrease, where you're getting a lot of trampling along with the grazing, or at least a high, and I don't know what number to put on it, but a high level of utilization and trampling. I mean, when I leave a paddock, I like to see pretty much everything either eaten or flattened. And since I went to these Highlanders, it's been harder to do. You know, there's a threshold there, 500, 600,000 pounds, 700,000, where it works a lot better than it does at 200,000 or below. Been my experience anyway.
Jed, do you see a difference between yearlings of all yearlings or only pairs?
The differences between pairs and yearlings in mob grazing. I can tell you I far 100 times prefer yearlings. But as far as what it does on the land, I don't know if there's much difference on the land. But as far as just the ease of management and whatever, you know, personally, yearlings are 10 times easier. Yeah.
But you don't go with yearlings primarily because of the weight gain?
Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I'd far prefer yearlings, but I'm stuck with cows because the gains on my meadows just won't make yearlings profitable enough. Yeah.
I think that previous question about numbers, that was related not to stocking density, but to number of animals.
Oh.
That mob effect. So somebody with 100 cow herd, should they bother with mob grazing?
Oh, okay.
Based on your experience?
I see.
Well, you know, because Neil Dennis and Savory and some of the others have said, yeah, you know, 700 or 800. Real, in your opinion, can a 100-head operator do it? Be successful?
Oh, I think so. I mean, you're going to get some benefit. My mom has got 7 cows. She's got a little acreage by North Platte. She has 7 cows. She mob grazes. But you know, she's moving the cattle on a fairly regular basis, and you know, she sees some benefit from that. Is that practical in every case? Well, maybe not. I mean, she's got a full-time job and she checks on them morning and night, and you know, it's not too big a deal. So it can work for smaller. Is the dynamic the same? No, it's not. I mean, you know, the interaction you get in a crowd, you know, if we took everybody in this room and made them come stand and from this table this way right here, you know, I guarantee you everybody's comfort level would change a little bit. And so it's kind of the same thing with cattle, but you can build in the recovery that you would get from mob grazing, but you might not get the same dynamic on the ground. But is there a benefit? Yes. Is it worth doing? That's a totally different question. Depends on the circumstance, you know. Just as a rule, my breed up has been better since I've done this, but my weaning weights have probably been a little less. It's had some variation, but the breed up has been excellent. It's been better on the Angus than the Highlander, I can tell you that. I don't really know why. I don't know if that's a heat issue or what's going on there, but on Angus cows, the breed up's been excellent. You know, they're on fresh grass continually, and then the bulls are just right there, right? I mean, there's no searching for a hot cow. I've run 1 to 100, you know, several times and had excellent breed ups that way. You can get a lot more power, a lot more mileage out of your bull when all the cows are right there. 1 to 100. Did everybody catch that? I hear some noises. I don't know if somebody about ready to call me a liar or what. No. I mean, there's a research. I don't know. We have an animal science guy here. I mean, 20 services a day is pretty doable with most bulls, and so, the only thing you can't control is if they multiple service the same cow. But, if you have 5 bulls and 500 cows, that's 100 services a day, I mean, I'm not an animal scientist, but it's worked for me, so. The only people that'll tell you otherwise are ones selling bulls. So they want you at 1 to 20 just to be careful. Okay, the economics to start up a program like this. Yeah, I don't know. That's probably going to be different for everybody. I mean, my fencing system is pretty inexpensive fencing. It's just a 2-wire electric. And then my tank and pipe scenario, I probably have around $10,000 invested in pipe and tank and a motor and that kind of thing. I call my pipeline system a poor man pipeline because I just have 6,000 feet of it, and then I just keep moving it around the ranch instead of burying lots of pipeline. In fact, one of the other guys in the that Randy Shin, you saw his name earlier, he did the whole bury the pipeline thing, and he calls his the expensive man pipeline after he said, "Oh, I wish I would have done your poor man pipeline thing." So it can be inexpensive, or you could spend a lot on it if you wanted to too. So.
Do you have an estimate of what you gain in terms of, say, carrying capacity, whether it's coming from the increased production or greater utilization, but how much more increased carrying capacity have you built up or seen over the years?
Okay, questions about carrying capacity. I probably hover in the 2 to 3 times range. I've been probably as high as 3 at different times, but probably since I started doing it, not much ever less than double. And be careful with people talking about these stocking rates. A lot of times if somebody says, "Oh, it's double, triple, quadruple, whatever," I heard one guy last year say 8 times stocking rate. Well, all that tells you is how horrible a job they were doing before. I mean, really. I mean, if you don't have any reference point, I mean, you can. So don't bother yourselves about these stocking rate things too much. Like in our area, the Sandhills, that land is probably managed pretty good for the most part. So if you don't manage it pretty good, it'll blow away. So you're not gonna go 8 times stocking rate where somebody's actually managed the grass reasonable. Somewhere where it's heavily degraded, well, maybe that can happen. I don't know, but don't bother. Some people make you think you're a lesser class citizen if you don't have 3, 4, 5 times stocking rate. All that tells me is that you were really stinking it up before. So.
How many cows a year? What's your cow per acre ratio?
Per acre?
What do you think?
Well, on 4,000 acres at home, I've been hovering right around 800 cows. So what is that? 5 per. Yep. On typically what they would probably call a 350 cow ranch. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe 400 at the most. Yep. So increase in stocking rate. pretty easy to attain. The one thing I haven't really seen any change in or seen any change anywhere is individual animal performance hasn't been a bit different. You know, just about, you're not going to do much better than just set stock grazing as far as individual animal performance. Seems to be a ceiling there, and individual animal performance seems to me to be almost 100% determined by where you live. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's say you're during your mob grazing season and you have a heavy rain. How much does that information affect the stand for later years or the mass of the plant mass for the transplant?
Okay. Question about getting a heavy rain in mob grazing time. Most of the time, it really hasn't been an issue for me because of my sand base, and usually there's a mat, you know, the root picture and whatnot. However, in 2010, we had a freakish amount of rain, and I had to actually change plans. We were mob grazing along on the meadow, and you know, there was 6 to 8 inches of water everywhere you stood, and so I think about the time we got the third 5-inch rain, or maybe the fourth we had 5 5-inch rain events that summer. About the third or fourth one, I actually had to just go back to my hills and wait it out, and that was the only time I've ever had to do that. But where the cattle were when it rained like that, we had other species pop up. A lot of cottonwoods popped up, willows. But that was a pretty brutal year for mob grazing. I got the water sandals, so I could walk in the water, and then those stupid little snails were everywhere, and they'd get in between your toes, and it was a miserable deal. Anna? Talk about the heifers and what else? I introduced my boys Luke and Jesse earlier. That's my helpers. Yeah. I have had interns off and on over the years, but I don't have planned to have any.
How are you going to handle Montana?
How am I going to handle it? I'm going to do the same thing, and just
Labor-wise.
labor-wise. Same crew. Yeah, same crew. No. It's just west of Billings. Yeah. Most of it's old wheat farm, but I found a place where there's a lot of water there. There's a small basin you would call it, and a creek called Canyon Creek runs through there, and there's wells in that area and we have some on this place, like 75 gallon a minute, so there's plenty for stock well. And actually, where the house is, there's 2 artesian wells, even though it's up on a rim, and it's kind of what I would call tableland. There's a little depression there, and there's a lot of water underneath it. So
How did you go about, I guess you're at Highlanders now, I know you've got some different species of breeds. How did you get to where you're at with that?
okay, how did I get where I'm at with the Highlands? Well, the original thought was, okay, I was in the buffalo business before I was in the cattle business. That's how I started, and they have some characteristics, some of which being, longer hair that sheds off, and they tend to be a little smaller, A lot of people don't believe me, but buffalo do not weigh what beef cattle weigh. And slower maturing, and they tend to survive on the plains with no supplements. And so I was kind of thinking, well, if that's what works here, maybe I should try to find a beef breed that was similar. And the Highlander was the closest thing I could come up with. And mostly I cross them. I don't know if you guys saw the picture earlier. That was a Highland cow with would be half Red Angus calf at side. But with any new venture, the results have been mixed. Some things about it have worked out, some not so good. The horn thing, I didn't see that coming, where I couldn't get the stock density where I liked it. But if you breed a Highlander to a pulled animal, pulled's dominant, and the calf crops coming up don't have horns, and so I'm working my way out of the horns. And at the same time, there happened to be a ton of them on the market, and so I bought them. I was the only bidder at the time, and so whatever. Would I do it again? Probably. I don't know. I would have started breeding the horns off a lot sooner, though. It took me a little while to figure that one out. And training them was way tougher. Like usually 2-3 days, an electric fence, and cows, you're good for the summer. These Highlanders, they'd be grazing along and not realize they're grazing under the fence, and then they'd hear something, and they'd look up. Well, they had that fence hooked on their horn. They got getting shocked, and they're just walking off with it, It took me about 3 weeks to get that. I was about ready to throw up my hands there for a minute, but they finally I got them all trained, because they pretty much all had to do it once. And then if it gets wrapped on them, and that's what that picture was. Somebody in the break asked me about my roping. Well, there you can see just kind of how the F1 progeny doesn't look very Highland usually. I mean, there's some variation, don't get me wrong, but so you get a lot of hybrid vigor because there's no, you're taking two very unrelated lines and crossing them. I'm sure lots of you in here know way more about that than me. And then the Highlanders are really, really hardy. I have never treated a Highlander for foot rot or pink eye. So there's got to be something genetic there, because we used to doctor a lot for foot rot, especially in these lower. But anyway, this one had the twine kind of wrapped around its horn and around 1 foot, so anyway, to get it off, I mean, what are you going to do? So this is how I rope animals, I guess. I don't know. Is anybody from PETA here? If they are, this is somebody else's. But I don't know. People think this looks funny, but you just knock them over and then they just lay there, and they're not choking down. They're not excited. You can do your work on them really quick, and then they're up. It's about the least stress way of doing anything to them, that we didn't have to run all the way back to the corral. We didn't have to go get the horse, none of that. So it's pretty quick and painless. Okay, anything else? I might have got off topic there.
Economics has been brought up a couple times.
Okay.
Those 500 moves in the summers, would that be equivalent to one hired hand? In an operation without.
Well, let me ask these two. How many times did you guys move the cattle this summer? You probably moved them 20 times, and you probably moved them 0 times. So, okay, I think they might be stretching it a little bit, but they think that they've moved maybe up to 25 times out of 500. So, guess who did the rest? And even then, I have a hard time calling it a full-time job myself, because, it takes me about 2 hours in the morning, move my water, move my fence sets and everything. And then the rest of the day, it's, you know, so you got probably 2 moves first thing in the morning. Daylight, move your equipment, then move them again, and then to the house. Neil Dennis watches Oprah. I do other things. And then, you know, it's just 20 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 more times through the day. So yes, I have to be around, but is it continual drudgery? No. I've worked a lot harder, I can tell you that. So, yeah. I have calved in the mob, yes. And you can pair out if you're going along. Most of the time, the new ones, they'll get as far away from the actual mob as they can. So that's toward the back fence. And so when you have a new one toward the back fence, you can just pull the back fence out and put it in front of her and leave the pairs behind. It works pretty good to leave the pairs behind. And sometimes I've just kept going with them. And most of the time that's not a problem. Sometimes you'll get into some really tall grass, you know, and there'll be a calf laying across the fence or something like that. But if you plan to have that back fence back a long ways where the cows can go back and get them, all reasons why I prefer yearlings for this. But I'm a yearling guy. I hate cows and calves. I'm sorry.
Your pastures that you don't get grazed in the growing season, does all of that get stockpiled over into the dormant season and then just for the next year? Or do you do any like harvesting for a reserve?
Well, for years, and this is how things change, right? No, I don't even consider haying. But for, let's see, I've been there 18 years, and probably 15 out of the 18, I could buy hay from my neighbors about as cheap as I could put it up, or sometimes cheaper, and so I didn't even bother about it. But then you get into the last 2 years where hay is super high, and I have had some people come in and do some bottoms for me a little bit. Yeah, just depends. But I prefer to buy it. I don't go through a lot, usually just weaning and then having some around in case you got a major snow event or something. Yeah.
If you do have forage left over after a year there in the meadows there, do you do anything special to use it the next year when your grazing season starts?
Question is, if I have leftover grass, do I do anything special to use it? No, I don't. I just keep with the same plan. Just lots of little moves, and that kind of stuff usually just works its way out. Like this last year, I think we made a big step toward incorporating that 3 years of litter that was standing there, because we actually had some moisture and it wasn't underwater, and so it just kind of takes care of itself if you just keep. And it's okay to have too much grass. It's a better problem to have than the other way. Kelly?
Yeah, I know you have a long recovery time, or adequate recovery time, but so you don't do much. But
I don't do much, that's true. I do not do much at all.
watch the change sequence of grazing from year to year. But on a given meadow, you don't start at one end and just work in a straight line towards the other end year after year after year. I mean, you'll change it up a little bit somehow, so that the same area is not grazed at the same time year after year.
Yeah, what I'm saying is in effect, it's always changed up because I couldn't get there the same time if I wanted to. And even then, I wouldn't be going the same speed because I'm either growing more grass this year or less grass. So, and I, you know, one year I'll go around it counterclockwise, the next year I'll go clockwise. You know, it just, I don't bother myself you know, oh geez, I was here this time last year. I don't bother about that kind of thing. You know. Too many other things to worry about than where you were at a year ago today. Yeah. Anna? Okay. So you might be asking, what am I going to do different? Yeah. I'm not going to do a whole lot different other than where I'm going is going to be a lot easier topography. You know, because I mean, most of you haven't been to my place, but the few of you that have, I mean, I have a lake or a swamp or a hill or something, and so, you know, it's kind of like this to try to find a place to do my lanes and whatnot. And this place I'm moving to, I mean, you can just go plat it, put your fences in, and you can see clear the other end of it from anywhere. You know, it's just a big flat, you know. So as far as easy, it's going to be pretty easy to do that. Yep. And then I hope to go in year one without one hoof. You know, I'll just spend a year getting it ready, get my infrastructure in, growing some biomass, and then start with some animals year two. I will need to do some planting. Yeah, some of it's still in wheat, some of it's still in fallow. Yeah. Most of what I'm getting was a wheat farm. Mm-hmm.
You'll be dealing with there, west of Mile City, on the upland site like that, probably 1,500, 2,000 pounds per duck, you know, with the seedy grasses that you do. It's a lot less than these meadows, so you'll, are you going to still try to take it to some of these real high stock densities that you've been doing here?
Yeah, I will. And I should, you know, I do have some experience. I do some consulting work, not a lot, but I've got a client in eastern Montana, similar rainfall, similar soils, similar type wheat yields, that's been doing this for 3 or 4 years now. And the trouble is he doesn't always do what I tell him, okay? But when he does, like he'll go over this, it's seeded back to tame grass and alfalfa. And where he does this, the next year it comes back like nuts, like, you know, like this deep alfalfa, like, you know, they can't even rake this stuff when they hay it. And so I told him, you know, just graze it again. Well, it bothers him so much to see this so much alfalfa there that he hays it, and then the next year we're back down to a little bit again. And so the results in that environment can be pretty good. Yeah. The main thing there is just making whatever raindrop falls stay there. You know, if you can get that to stay there, you're immediately in good shape. And what else was I going to say about that? I don't know. I forgot. Go ahead.
What are you going to plant?
I'm going to. What am I going to plant? I'm looking into a lot of annuals initially, different cover crops, some of these forage peas.
What you anticipate keep doing on a long-term basis, or what's the long-term?
No, that's just initial. Get the ground covered, get some nitrogen back in the system. I'll go perennial just as soon as I can. Yeah. And I'll plant some perennials. You know, alfalfa does good there. I'll get some alfalfa in there, pubescent wheatgrass, whatever will grow. I'll just keep working on whatever will grow, and in time, I think it'll. You know, we'll get it strictly perennial. I don't want to be fiddling with a tractor any more than I have to. Yeah. I do not now, no. And I don't anticipate doing any up there either. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe with some establishment on some bare ground, I don't know, maybe, but once I get going, I shouldn't need to.
Use concentration of the urine in your mob grazing strategy.
Yep. 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 So we'll see. You'll have to come see me in Montana, Anna. Mm-hmm. So my experience with it did lead, I had certain things I was looking for, right? And one of them was, well, is it going to be easy to fence there? Is there plenty of water? You know, things like that. So, and the gains, of course, there are good. You know, talking about economics, you know, if a yearling typically gains 2 1/4 pounds up there, and at my place they gain, you know, pound 1. You know, I've immediately doubled my animal performance per head. So easy to grow more grass, not very easy to change animal performance. I hope to either get rid of my cows or place them on leases, and then I hope to just run yearlings there. Yep. Yep. My kids are not supposed to let me buy any cows. Try to keep it simple. Lower labor. Mm-hmm. Well, is everybody bored?
Questions for Chad? And Chad will be around through the afternoon, right?
Yeah, I'll stick around for a while.
We
Yeah.
sure need